October 12, 2038, unknown coordinates. The message broke through a wave of dense static, filled with distortion. I was in the command module, adjusting the communication equipment, when the robotic, interference-riddled voice of mission control hit me like a punch in the gut. Abort the mission. Return immediately. I repeat, return to base immediately. For a moment, the message seemed like a distant echo, surreal, almost like a fragment of a nightmare invading reality. My fingers froze over the control panel, and I looked around the cramped module. Everything seemed normal. The cold light of the screens flickered as usual. The soft hum of the life support systems filled the air. But I knew that when an order like this came directly from high command, things were far from normal. We had only been on Mars for 4 days. 4 days of a mission that was supposed to last 6 months. None of this made sense. My name is John Kerrigan. I'm the chief geologist of this expedition, officially sent by NASA to collect samples and study the Martian soil in search of signs of life. But that's only the public version, the one any civilian could read in the papers. What no one knew is that our mission, codenamed Operation Dark Red, had a far more sinister and secret goal: to investigate a presence detected on Mars that had remained classified for decades. When I was recruited for this mission, my superiors warned me that there would be sensitive details that would only be revealed on site. What I didn't know was that these details would include things that no one on Earth would believe, not even if they saw them with their own eyes. The landing on Mars was like any other, or so I thought. The approach was smooth. The ship made contact with the surface with a slight bump, and soon we disembarked to establish our base. The Martian landscape stretched out in all directions, a cold and barren desert, lifeless. The red, sterile soil crumbled beneath our feet, and the distant horizon was dotted with weathered hills and craters that seemed like silent witnesses to an ancient and forgotten history. The first night passed without incident. I, Tyson, Hendrik, and Alana, my team, focused on setting up camp and starting the initial data collection routines. Everything seemed calm, but calm is deceptive when you're on Mars. That stillness, that absolute silence, disturbed me in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if the planet was waiting, lurking, with a cruel and infinite patience. On the second day, things began to change. We started noticing anomalies, small at first, almost insignificant, but increasingly hard to ignore. The terrain, which seemed solid and inert, began to show inexplicable variations in our instruments. Faint, but constant, vibrations with no clear origin. Our temperature readings fluctuated in areas that should have been stable. Something was wrong, and the worst was yet to come. Hendrik, our engineer, was the first to see the rock formations. We were about 10 kilometers from the base when he suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on a distant point in the landscape. "Do you see that?" His voice crackled over the radio, breaking the silence. I followed his gaze, and in the distance I saw what he was pointing at. At first it looked like just a pile of rocks, like many others we had passed. But as we got closer, their arrangement seemed wrong. It wasn't natural. The rocks were arranged in a symmetrical pattern, like obelisks worn down by time, positioned with a precision that couldn't be random. "This isn't on the map," said Alana, checking her notes. The biologist on our team was always the most skeptical, the most objective, but even she seemed unsettled. No geological formation in this area should look like that. We approached cautiously, hearts racing. The closer we got, the more the strangeness of the formation became evident. There were symbols carved into the stones, patterns that didn't belong to any language we knew. The engravings were ancient, deeply eroded by time, yet still visible enough to send chills down our spines. Something, or someone, had placed them there. That night, something shifted in the camp's atmosphere. The air inside the module felt heavier, denser. It was a palpable sensation, an invisible tension that slowly suffocated us. Alana was especially quiet, almost withdrawn, as she analyzed the soil samples we had collected near the rocks. "This doesn't make sense," she suddenly said. "This soil, it's like it's been exposed to some type of radiation or magnetic field that shouldn't exist here. We're on Mars, for God's sake. There's nothing here that could cause this kind of distortion." The radio then crackled unexpectedly. cutting through the conversation like a knife. It was Tyson, standing guard outside the module. "Something's out there," he said, his voice low and uncertain. I stood up, feeling the blood freeze in my veins. "What do you mean, something's out there? Be more specific, Tyson." "I don't know, John. But I swear, I saw something moving near those hills to the north." Those words hit me like an electric shock. We rushed outside, Alana and Hendrik following me, and Tyson met us outside, still pointing toward the horizon. He was tense, his face covered in cold sweat, something hard to see considering the extremely dry and cold Martian environment. "Where did you see it?" I asked, trying to stay calm, but already feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "There." He pointed his flashlight toward the hills standing out in the landscape. The beam of light wavered slightly, and the darkness seemed to move in sync with it. My eyes followed the direction, and for a moment, everything seemed calm. But then I saw it. There, in the shadows of the hills, something moved. A large, shapeless figure, but fast. Too fast to be a natural phenomenon, but irregular enough to be utterly alien. I could swear that thing was watching us, measuring our movements. "It can't be," I muttered, unable to fully process what I was seeing. Alana grabbed my arm. "We need to get inside, now." The third day was the worst of all. We woke up with an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something invisible was pressing down on us, suffocating every rational thought. Hendrik spent most of the morning checking the equipment, trying to find an explanation for the anomalies. He looked pale, sick. "What's happening to you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, but my own nerves were showing. "I'm hearing voices," he said, without meeting my eyes. "Since last night, while I was sleeping, whispers, like someone's trying to tell me something." I tried to reassure him, suggesting it was just the stress of the mission, but deep down, I knew there was something more. And then, the creature attacked. It was night again. We were gathered inside the module, discussing the strange readings Alana had detected in the soil, when the lights started flickering. At first we thought it was just a simple power drop, but then we heard the sound. A low growl, almost like a deep moan, that resonated throughout the module. It was a sound none of us had ever heard before, something primal and threatening. "Did you hear that?" Tyson asked, his voice full of disbelief. That's when the front door began to creak. Hendrik stood up, slowly, his eyes fixed on the door. The creaking became a scraping, something outside scratching hard against the metal, and then the attack began. The door of the main module began to shake violently, as if something was forcing its way in. The metallic sound of the hinges groaning under pressure filled the space. Inside the module, the tension materialized as a wave of pure terror. It was as if the very air had become thicker, harder to breathe. No one said anything, but we all knew the creature, whatever it was out there, and it wouldn't stop until it got to us. Hendrik moved first. He had always been the bravest, or perhaps the most reckless. He ran toward the control panel, his fingers trembling as he typed in the commands to close the secondary security door. The security system was designed to withstand most extreme conditions on Mars, including sandstorms and potential micrometeorite impacts. However, I deeply doubted that this system had been designed to withstand something like what was outside. "That thing's going to get in if we don't do something fast," Alana shouted, her voice filled with panic. The sounds intensified. Now it wasn't just scratching. There were powerful blows, as if something with immense force was pounding on the module's structure. With each impact, the floor shook slightly, and the metal groaned under the growing pressure. We were locked in, with no way out, trapped in a small metal box in the middle of an alien desert, at the mercy of something we didn't understand. "We've got to run!" Tyson screamed, his voice breaking from the mixture of fear and adrenaline. "If that thing gets in here, we're dead!" But where could we go? The escape vehicle was about 500 meters away, parked outside our makeshift base. To reach it, we'd have to cross the darkness of the Martian desert, with that thing hunting us. I looked at Alana, who seemed on the verge of a breakdown, and then at Hendrik, who was still trying to keep calm as he worked on the control panel. "We have to take the risk," I said, forcing myself to believe my own words. "If we stay here, we have no chance." The door shook again, this time with such force that a thin crack began to form in the metal. The creature was getting closer, and it seemed like it had all the time in the world to toy with us. Hendrik typed in one last command, and the lights in the module flickered for a second before returning to normal. "That should buy us a little more time," he said, panting. I triggered the emergency protocol. The main door's reinforced now, but it won't last long. I knew he was right. The noise outside was intensifying with every second. The creature wouldn't stop until it got in. "Everyone grab your suits," I shouted, pointing to the locker where our spacesuits were stored. "We're getting out of here and heading to the escape vehicle." Alana hesitated for a moment, panic still visible in her eyes, but she followed my order. We suited up as fast as we could, with trembling hands and sweat running down our foreheads, even in Mars's extreme cold. The creatures pounding on the door seemed to echo in our skulls. It was as if each blow drained the last bit of hope we had left. With our suits on and helmets locked, we were ready. Hendrik activated the control panel again, this time to open the small emergency hatch leading to the back of the module. It was our only chance. The plan was simple: cross the open field as fast as possible and reach the escape vehicle before the creature noticed. "Go now," I ordered, stepping through the hatch. Outside, the biting cold of Mars immediately enveloped us. The dim light of the distant sun barely illuminated the landscape, and the shadows of the hills in the distance seemed deeper than ever. The deadly silence, which had once felt merely uncomfortable, now felt suffocating. Each step we took stirred up a light cloud of red dust beneath our feet, and the only sound we could hear was the muffled sound of our own breathing through our helmets. We ran toward the escape vehicle, our legs heavy under Mars's gravity, which, though lighter than Earth's, seemed to make our movements sluggish in that moment. Fear made everything harder. Every second, I expected to hear the sound of the creature coming after us, but so far, the only noise was the faint whistling of the wind. We were less than 100 meters from the vehicle when it happened. Tyson was the first to fall. He let out a muffled scream through his helmet, and I turned just in time to see something huge and dark emerge from the surface of the ground, like a living shadow. The creature wasn't exactly what I expected. It wasn't a monster with claws and fangs, but an amorphous, pulsating mass that seemed to constantly shift and change. Its body stretched in several directions, each part transforming and extending as if it had no physical limits. Tyson was pulled to the ground in seconds, his body vanishing into the red dust. The horror of his screams echoed through our helmets, even as the radio abruptly cut off. "Tyson!" Alana screamed, her voice broken with grief, but there was no time to mourn. There was no time for anything but survival. "Run!" I yelled, pushing Alana toward the vehicle. Hendrik was almost there, his steps desperate. The creature moved with an unnatural speed, its distorted forms writhing across the ground like tentacles spreading out, reaching closer to us. The desperation was overwhelming. The certainty that we wouldn't survive hit me like a punch in the gut. But I kept running. The thing was closing in faster than any of us could react. Alana stumbled, and I saw the dark tendrils crawling toward her. I spun on the spot and reached out, grabbing her arm with all my strength. "No!" she screamed, trying to break free, but I pulled her back. In a desperate move, I dragged Alana to the side, narrowly escaping the creature's grasp as it lunged to take us. Hendrik was already in the vehicle, shouting through the radio for us to get in fast. With one last effort, I shoved Alana toward the door and followed her inside, slamming the hatch shut behind us. The vehicle roared to life with a low, powerful hum, and Hendrik sped off before I could even sit down. "Is everyone here?" he asked, his voice trembling but steady. "Tyson," Alana muttered, her words filled with sorrow. A deadly silence followed as we left the open field behind, the vehicle speeding across the red dunes. No one mentioned Tyson again. We knew he was lost, and there was nothing we could do. The horror was so close that thinking of anything beyond survival was impossible. The creature didn't immediately follow us. Maybe it was satisfied with its first victim, or maybe it was just toying with us. I didn't know. All I knew was that we needed to find a way off this cursed planet before it was too late. Hendrik drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the control panel, while Alana wept quietly in the back seat. The vehicle raced toward the extraction point, where a second support ship was supposed to be waiting for us, but with communications cut off, and our navigation systems compromised, there were no guarantees anyone was coming for us. "What was that thing?" I asked, more to break the silence than expecting an answer. "I don't know," Hendrik replied, not taking his eyes off the road, "but it's clear we're not alone here." The vehicle sped through a landscape that was becoming increasingly surreal. The hills, once simple rock formations, now seemed alive, contorted into shapes that defied natural laws. As we moved further from the main module, a growing sense of disorientation took hold of me. The horizon, which had once stretched out in a clear, stable line, now seemed blurry, almost shimmering, like a mirage. Hendrik drove in silence, focused on keeping the vehicle on a route he wasn't even sure was the right one. "How long until the extraction point?" I asked, trying to push away the image of Tyson being taken by the creature, his muffled scream still echoing in my head. Hendrik took a while to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "If the coordinates are still accurate, maybe 6 hours. 6 hours. 6 hours trapped in a tiny vehicle, knowing that thing was out there, lurking." It was an unbearable thought. Alana remained silent in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the window, but I knew she wasn't looking at the landscape. She was lost somewhere inside her own mind, perhaps trying to make sense of what we had encountered. Or worse, trying to forget. "What didn't NASA tell us?" I asked, not addressing anyone in particular. "It wasn't just NASA," Hendrik said. "There were others. Russians, Europeans, even the Chinese. They all sent missions to Mars in recent decades, and none of them ended the way the public was told. Whatever this is, they knew something was here. Something ancient. Ancient." The word resonated within me uncomfortably. We were dealing with something far beyond a typical alien life form, if there was anything typical about this at all. The creature that attacked us seemed more like a primordial force, something that had existed long before Mars became the barren desert we knew. A remnant of an era when Mars may have been much more alive. "Did you know this before we came?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. My question sounded more like an accusation. Hendrik shook his head, frustrated. "I heard rumors, nothing more. Things you hear in the halls, fragments of classified reports, but no one knew what was real or not." I wanted to believe him, but something in the way he spoke made me question how honest he was being. Even so, at that moment, there was no time for arguments or blame. We needed to survive. "Let's monitor the creature," I suggested, still looking at the horizon, which seemed to warp more with every passing moment. "We've got sensors in the vehicle. If it gets close, we'll be warned." Hendrik nodded, activating the vehicle's monitoring panel. The screen flickered for a moment before displaying a topographic map of the area. We had covered a few kilometers, but we were still far from the extraction point. The area around us seemed clear, with no immediate signs of movement. However, this didn't comfort me. I knew the creature had a way of camouflaging itself, hiding in the shadows and the very dust of the Martian soil. The silence inside the vehicle seemed to stretch on for hours, each second marked by the growing tension. Hendrik kept his eyes fixed on the control panel, while Alana, still shaken, hadn't uttered a word since we entered the vehicle. I tried to think of a plan. We needed a contingency plan if that thing reached us again. That's when the radio crackled. At first, I thought it was just interference, but it soon became clear there was something more. A distorted voice, almost unrecognizable, tried to break through the static. Hendrik adjusted the controls, trying to clear the signal. "Mission Control, are you there?" he asked with little hope. The reply came, though fragmented and broken. "This is Control. Mission status. Code red. Code red," I repeated, looking at Hendrik. He said nothing, but his expression darkened further. We knew what that meant. A code red indicated an extreme emergency, something that could compromise the entire mission, perhaps even more than that. The interference continued to break up the communication, but some words were clear enough to make us even more uneasy. Anomalous, multiple, objects, atmosphere compromised. Something else was happening. Something much bigger than just the creature we had encountered. The hours dragged on, each minute more agonizing than the last. Hendrik didn't slow down the vehicle, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. But as much as we wanted to believe we were getting farther from the creature, There was an overwhelming feeling that it was still close, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Alana, who had been silent the entire ride, finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was a strange clarity in her words. "This won't stop," she said. "The creature, it's connected to the planet. It's part of it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, not understanding. Alana looked at me with an expression that mixed fear and acceptance. While we were in the module, I started doing some additional readings. The soil samples near the rocks, they were alive in some way, as if the soil itself was pulsing with energy. "That creature we saw isn't an isolated being. It is Mars. It's part of the planet." I stayed silent, trying to process what she had just said. If Alana was right, we weren't just dealing with a common alien life form. We were facing something much bigger, something that could be a manifestation of the planet itself. "Then how do we kill it?" Hendrik asked, his voice harsh and practical. Alana shook her head. "I don't know if we can. Not without destroying everything around it. Maybe not even then." The hopelessness began to grow inside me. What we were facing wasn't just a physical threat. It was an existential one. And even if we managed to leave Mars, how could we ensure that thing would stay confined here? The radio crackled again, interrupting my thoughts. This time, the static seemed stronger, as if something was directly interfering with the signal. And then, amidst the noise, a new voice emerged. It wasn't human. It was something more deep, guttural, as if it came from the depths of the planet. "What is that?" Hendrik stammered, adjusting the radio frantically. The voice continued, but this time it felt like it was speaking directly in our minds. The words were incomprehensible, but the feeling was clear. We were being warned, cautioned. Something was coming. Something bigger, older, more dangerous than the creature we had already encountered. The vehicle began to lose power. I felt the slight jerk as Hendrik tried to increase speed, but the engine groaned as if it were being drained by an invisible force. "What's happening?" I asked, already knowing there was no good answer. "I don't know," Hendrik replied, his eyes wide as he checked the panels. Everything was working perfectly until now. I looked out the window and saw the shadows of the hills contorting again, moving as if they were more than just simple geological formations. They were alive, and they were closing in on us. The vehicle trembled as it lost power. The Martian landscape around us, which already seemed threatening, now seemed to be swallowing us whole. The dim light of the distant sun barely illuminated the reddish soil, and the shadows of the hills seemed to grow as if they were something living, snaking toward us. "We're running out of power," Hendrik announced, pounding the control panel with force, as if he could squeeze more life out of the vehicle. "The system's being drained." "Drained? What do you mean?" I asked, the urgency in my voice harder to hide. Hendrik looked at me, his eyes wide. "I don't know. The battery was charged. The system was intact, but now..." He fell silent for a moment, struggling against the reality before him. "Now it's like something's sucking the energy out of the vehicle." It was the creature. I knew it, just as everyone in the vehicle knew. The presence hunting us, the entity moving in the shadows of Mars, wasn't just a physical being. We were dealing with something much larger, something that wasn't confined to flesh and bone. The creature, the thing, was a manifestation of the planet itself, and it was surrounding us. "How much time do we have?" I asked, trying to keep my head clear while panic gripped my chest. Hendrik didn't respond immediately. He looked at the monitors, then at the road ahead. "Maybe an hour, at most. After that, we're stranded here." My stomach tightened. An hour. We had an hour before the vehicle stopped completely, and we were left at the mercy of that thing. I looked at Alana, who remained silent, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She no longer seemed terrified, not in the way someone should be when facing imminent death. There was something strange about the way she looked at the approaching shadows, as if she already knew what was coming. "Alana," I called, trying to break her trance. "What do you think is happening?" She took a long time to answer, and when she did, her voice was calm, almost resigned. "I already told you. This isn't a normal creature. It's not something we can fight with weapons or strategies. We're in its territory. It controls us. I wanted to scream, to protest, but deep down, I knew she was right. The creature wasn't just a physical threat. It was something bigger, a primordial force that governed the environment around it. Every move we made seemed to be part of a larger game, a game in which we were doomed to lose. "We need to think of a way out," Hendrik insisted, his voice tense, his eyes focused on the panel. "If we can reach the extraction point, maybe we can call for reinforcements. The rescue ship should be nearby." "But what if the creature is waiting for us there?" Alana asked, her voice cold. Hendrik fell silent. We knew it was a real possibility. The creature had been hunting us since the moment we left the module. It was part of Mars, and wherever we went, it would be there. The silence inside the vehicle was suffocating. Hendrik, determined to stick to the plan of reaching the extraction point, pushed the vehicle as hard as he could, though it was clear the vehicle wouldn't last much longer. The constant hum of failing electronics was a cruel reminder that our situation was becoming more desperate by the second. Maybe 30 minutes passed before we felt the first jolt. It was sudden, as if the vehicle had hit an invisible barrier. The impact threw us against our seatbelts, and for a moment, everything inside the vehicle flickered. The monitors, the lights, even the life support systems. The engine groaned one last time, and then silence. "Shit," Hendrik shouted, slamming his hands on the steering wheel. "We've lost everything." "Are we stopped?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Hendrik just nodded, his jaw clenched in frustration. I looked outside and saw that we were surrounded by a vast red plain with nothing around us but dust and the shadows of distant hills. The creature wasn't visible, but I could feel its presence. It was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to get out and try to fix it," Hendrik suggested, starting to move toward the rear hatch. "If we can restart the system, maybe we can still make it to the extraction point." "No," Alana said suddenly, her voice firm. Hendrik stopped and looked at her. "What did you say?" "We're not fixing this. It wants us to go outside. It's waiting for us out there." She looked at both of us, her eyes steady, almost as if she were seeing something beyond what we could see. "Don't you feel it? The whole planet. It's alive. She's everywhere. If we go out there, we're giving ourselves to her." Alana's words, as terrifying as they were, made a certain kind of sense. There was something wrong with Mars, something that went beyond simple biology or geology. The creature wasn't just a being. She was the planet. Every move we made seemed to be guided by her, as if we were being drawn deeper into her trap. "So, what do you suggest?" Hendrik asked, his voice filled with frustration. "We just sit here until she gets us?" Alana looked at him, emotionless. Maybe that's what she wants. For a while, we stood in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what was happening. I felt the despair growing inside me, a crushing sense of helplessness. The vehicle was dead, and outside, in the shadows, something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to act. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the silence. Something outside in the plane was moving. A low noise, almost like a rustle, but deeper, as if the very ground was shifting. I stood up quickly and went to the window. What I saw made my blood freeze. In the distance, the Martian surface was changing. The ground, once static, began to stir like a wave, rippling and contorting as if it were alive. The shadows of the hills seemed to stretch toward us, snaking across the ground. The creature was moving, but in a way I could never have imagined. She wasn't just an isolated entity. She was taking control of the entire landscape around us. "She's coming," I muttered, feeling the panic rise in my throat. Hendrik ran to the window and saw the same thing I did. "We've got to get out of here, now." "Where to?" Alana asked, her voice monotonous, as if she had already given up. Hendrik looked around, his eyes frantic. He had no answer, and we all knew it. The vehicle was dead, and we were surrounded by something we couldn't understand, much less fight. But the worst was yet to come. That's when the lights inside the vehicle started flickering again, not from power failure, but from something much more sinister. The screens on the monitors filled with static, and the radio, which had been silent since the last interrupted communication, suddenly came to life with a chilling hiss. "They are here." The voice that emerged from the radio wasn't human. It was deep, distorted, and seemed to come from all directions at once. "You came for us." I looked at Hendrik, my heart racing. "What's happening?" That voice, it couldn't be real, but it was. She was speaking to us, as if the very entity of Mars was communicating with us. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the oppression in the air seemed to grow, as if the atmosphere around us was being manipulated by something invisible and malevolent. "She's trapping us," Alana said, finally turning to face us. "The creature, the planet, they're connected. They know we're here, and now, we're part of it." Hendrik stood up, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and anger. "We're not dying here. I'm not letting that happen." Without waiting for more answers, he opened the rear hatch and ran out of the vehicle, disappearing into the red dust of the Martian desert. "Hendrik!" I shouted, but he didn't hear me. Hendrik disappeared into the red dust, running blindly into the vastness of Mars. I stood frozen for a second, the scream stuck in my throat, unsure if I should follow him or stay in the vehicle. The creature was out there, and I knew he didn't stand a chance. But the urge to do something, to not stay trapped in that nightmare, almost pushed me to follow him. Alana, still inside the vehicle, pulled me back to reality with her calm and strangely cold voice. "He's already dead." I looked at her incredulous. "You don't know that." She shook her head slowly. "Yes, we do. We all knew. Since we first saw that thing, we were doomed. She's not going to let us go." Her words echoed through the empty vehicle. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sounds the creature had made. Outside, the dust moved slowly, as if the planet was breathing. I could feel the creature's presence in everything around us, as if she were part of Mars itself, controlling every movement, every sound, even the air we breathed. My survival instinct forced me to think quickly. There was no waiting for rescue, and the vehicle was dead. If we were going to get out of there alive, we'd need to find a way to distract that thing. But how do you escape something that seemed omnipresent? "We need a distraction," I muttered, more to myself than to Alana. She laughed softly, a sound that scared me for its lack of emotion. "A distraction? For something that controls the whole planet? There's nowhere to run, John." I turned to her, now angry. "So you're just going to give up? Is that it?" Alana sighed, her eyes fixed on the red horizon. "It's not a matter of giving up. I've already understood what's happening. This creature, she's the end of everything we know. Mars, as we know it, was never just a dead planet. It's alive, and now we're becoming part of it." Before I could respond, I heard a scream from the direction Hendrik had run. The sound pierced the silence like a blade. It was a scream of despair, short and agonizing, echoing across the empty terrain. The creature had found him. The last drop of hope drained from me. Hendrik was dead. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She got him." Alana looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of resignation and something almost supernatural. "I told you, there's nowhere to run. She's going to get us, one by one, until we're part of the planet. Part of her." I was on the verge of a breakdown, the terror finally taking hold of me completely. But something about the way Alana spoke seemed wrong, as if she knew more than I did, as if she had accepted something I still couldn't understand. "You knew this all along, didn't you?" I asked, approaching her. "From the beginning, you knew what we were facing." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I suspected it as soon as I saw the first samples. The soil, the way it reacted. It wasn't normal. But what I didn't know was how deep it went. Now I understand. We're no longer mere visitors. We're being assimilated. Mars doesn't just want to kill us. It wants to consume us. You sound like that doesn't bother you." She smiled, a sad, resigned smile, but with a hint of something I couldn't understand. "Maybe because I've already accepted it. Resisting only prolongs the inevitable. We're trapped in the cycle of something much bigger than us. If we accept that, maybe there's some relief." I stepped back, not knowing what to say. "You're crazy. We can't just give up. I'll find a way." "No, John," she interrupted me, now more firmly. "There's no way out. No matter how much we run or fight, the creature will get us. She's part of Mars, part of the very fabric of this place. And now, we are too. A sound came from outside, more intense this time. The shadows around the vehicle began to lengthen, contorting in an impossible way. It was as if the planet itself was moving, closing in around us. The creature was approaching, and this time I knew she wouldn't stop until we were in her grasp. "John," Alana said softly, "it's time." She stood up, and to my horror, opened the vehicle's hatch, stepping out onto the surface of Mars. The faint light of the filtered atmosphere reflected on her suit, and for a moment, she stood there, staring at the vast red expanse. The air around her seemed to vibrate, as if the planet itself was communicating with her. "Alana, what are you doing?" I shouted, rushing to the door. She turned to face me one last time. Her eyes were calm, without fear. "I'm accepting it. You should too." Then she took a few more steps away from the vehicle. That's when I saw it. The creature. Not like before, not just as a shadow. Now she was an overwhelming presence, gigantic, something that transcended human comprehension. A formless mass of shadows and lights that moved and pulsed in unison with the Martian soil. She didn't have a defined physical body. She was an entity, a living force, and she was closing in on Alana. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stood there, waiting. The thing enveloped her, slowly, like a wave of darkness swallowing everything around it. Her outline disappeared, and the silence returned. There were no screams, no resistance. It was as if she had been absorbed, made part of that place in a way I would never understand. I stood frozen, unable to move, breathe, or think. Then, I heard the voice. The same voice we heard over the radio, but this time it didn't come from a device. It was in my head, whispering, "You are the last one." I felt panic rising again. I tried to move, to run, but I knew it was useless. She was everywhere. There was no escape. The creature approached. The shadows around me began to close in, and the darkness swallowed everything. The ground beneath my feet felt alive, pulsing with the same energy that now inhabited me. I could no longer distinguish where I ended and Mars began. She was inside me, slowly consuming me. In the end, the truth became clear. Mars had never been dead. We were, and now we were part of it.